Jeffrey, thank you for joining us. It's really exciting to get the opportunity to talk to you. We're big fans of what you and many of your colleagues are working on, and we want to be as helpful as possible. Before we get started, I wonder if you could just give a kind of broad summary of your background and what you're up to now and what you're focused on.
I'm a student here in the U.S. Currently doing my PhD in history at Georgetown. So I do live here around D.C. and for the past couple of years, I've been very involved with the Hong Kong youth activist movement, and I was a part of Demosisto, our youth activist group, with Nathan Law and Joshua Wong and Agnes Chow, who are probably more familiar with among the international community. Recently there was the national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing, and we decided that we would have to leave the group and reorganize. But obviously, at least I speak for myself when I say that I'll continue to be doing the kind of work that I've been doing for years, and that means a lot of that means working with people across the aisle in Washington, and trying to push forward the Hong Kong issue and make sure that we're not forgotten by the international community.
Yeah, fantastic. Are you finding that there's broad bipartisan support for your work?
Yes, so and it has become increasingly bipartisan, and we really do see that in the past, I would say maybe 2 3 years, especially where we see this kind of new consensus emerging when it comes to how Americans perceive the threat of China. I mean, since Nixon went to China in 1972, the consensus has always been that engagement was good, but it is only in more recent times when the threat of China becomes increasingly clear, whether it's on the South China Sea, whether it's on peripheries, including Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan, or in Central Asia with Tibet and Xinjiang, the Uyghurs there in Xinjiang, and also just globally as well, and seeing that change from both parties trying to outwit the other in terms of engaging China and opening new markets, to now both parties trying to outwit each other in terms of in terms of actually pushing forward policies and agenda items that would push back against this kind of aggression and imperialism. I think that change has been pretty clear ever since I've moved here to the U.S. For college, actually 7 years ago, and I've seen that change firsthand.
Yeah, that's great to hear. You mentioned something that I think is a lot of us are realizing now in the West, which is that there was a general conventional wisdom that if you would bring China to the global table, that they would westernize over time, and that the kind of capitalist system that we have would rub off on China, and they become more liberal. But obviously, that hasn't happened, as you just pointed out. And I'd like to know what it is that you think it is that is unique about the communist regime that actually has made that exactly wrong.
Right. And well, obviously, you're right to know that that has been the consensus in the West. And I would just add that, in fact, that was also a consensus among pro-democracy Hong Kongers for decades. I mean, we
Yep.
obviously, or the generation before me, obviously were outraged and disappointed and frustrated and anxious in the days after the Tiananmen massacre of 1989. But throughout the 90s and throughout the 2000s, there was still the kind of idea that, making China a stakeholder in the international community would help it respect international law, for instance, and that would include the 1984 Sino-British Joint Declaration that
Mm.
governed, Hong Kong system, a constitutional system and rule of law for 50 years after the handover of 1997. I think part of why that didn't work has a lot to do with one man, Xi Jinping, who took power, about 7 8 years ago, and he is determined to be a strongman ruler. He is determined to prop up ultra nationalism in China. I mean,
Mm.
in name it is a communist party, and certainly large parts of the economy is state owned. But I think it's a regime devoid of ideology. I mean, it is nothing but brutal nationalism that is driving behind a lot of the decisions that it is making. And so so Xi Jinping as leader would be one factor, and also just how China has actually benefited from the from favorable trade deals, for instance, from entering the
Hmm.
WTO, and it realizes now that it is strong enough, and it does not have to abide by the rules. So so having that power economically, diplomatically, militarily, for instance, that they did not have even just a decade ago, now give them more leverage over the West and the rest of the free world. So I think these are the major factors.
Yeah,